Let's go. Hey, good to have you here. We're jumping into some code. We're looking at how to make a Madlib in React. We're doing this here in Code Sandbox. Let's jump right in. If you're part of the class, good to have you here. We're going to go a little bit quickly as we've covered some of this stuff in earlier videos. So let's jump into it. So you can see this is part of my final. And the Madlib isn't done yet, so looking at that Madlib component here, we got our title, and the Madlib has ultimately like two parts to it, right? It has like the input from the user, and they enter like some certain words, like the name of an object, the name of a whatever, and then it has the story that we write, and then like we kind of insert the user's words into there. So we're going to need some ultimately going to have to do two things in our project. We're going to have to create some text input handlers, so we're going to have to deal with users being able to input information and like gathered info. And then the second thing that we're going to have to do is make a button that kind of like hides the questions and shows the answers. And so this is these are these two ultimately things that we're trying to do in our application. So let's jump into it. Remembering the first thing that let's see here, we'll do some paragraph. Sure. Is it autofill? Yeah, autofill. We'll make a paragraph and we'll say enter a name, and this will be the first input here, and that's exactly what we need for our next HTML whole, guys. We need to create an input, and the input type is going to be text, and it is by default. Usually there are a whole bunch of different types of inputs that we've talked about before, and you can also put a class name in here. We'll put a placeholder because that's just kind of like classy, and that placeholder say enter a name, and that's just kind of nice to have that like subtle text there to help guide the users. And we'll create a couple of those, but before we do, let's create the full like kind of route so we see how it works, and then we'll kind of repeat it a couple times. So once we got this, of course, we also need to collect information from the user, because right now we're not grabbing it and we want to spit it out somewhere. So let's make a place to put it out. Let's create like our output. So let's see, little known fact, Nikola Tesla used to be called, and then we'll put in whatever the username is here, right there, whatever the user puts in, blank, when he was a child. Now, of course, we don't actually want like username. We want whatever like the user puts in for a name, and so we'll get back to that, but we'll put that there as like a stub for the moment. So we need a way of collecting this information and then spitting it out right there. We're going to use it. We're going to do that using hooks, as you may have guessed from previous lessons here. So we're going to create a constant, and we're going to call that sure. Why don't we just call that username, and that'll be like the name that the user entered. And then we need to create a set username, which will be the function that allows us to change it. Remember, we throw that in our brackets, and we say to use the state, and then this is what we want the default, the initial value to be. So I don't know, we could put in something like Bobette, but of course Bobette just without those what are they called, quotation marks around it. It's looking for a variable, so we throw those around it to make it a string, which is the set of letters that it actually wants to spit out. So let's see here. We save it all, and we're going to get an error because we haven't yet, yeah, there it is, yep, because we haven't yet imported useState, which is that special hook that we're using that we got to bring into our application when we use it. So we throw it right there in the line with React. Booyah. And now we still got username right here. well, how the heck do we, instead of writing the string username, we wanted to grab the variable username. And recall the way that we grab JS and variables and stuff is we just wrap it in brackets, those curly brackets. And now you'll notice, boom, instead of username, you see Bobette. Hey, perfect, excellent, wonderful. So, we have a, how did this end up on a different line? I don't know what's going on here. It's weird. Great, fantastic. We got username, we're using it. Now, it's not yet connected to our input. I type here and it has no effect with Bobette. So we're gonna set that up, and we're gonna set that up, if you'll recall, doing this, adding a property to our input, and this is gonna be like an event listener. It's gonna be listening like for when something happens, and this property is gonna be called onChange, and it's looking for whenever this input changes. And we're gonna say onChange is gonna be equal to what? Setting the username. That's what we want to do, and we have to do that as an arrow function. So those open, close, equals, and then we got our cute looking arrow. I always like this. I always like how arrow functions look. And then, so what do we actually want to do? We want to do set username, and then we want to wrap the parentheses around whatever we want it to change it to. So we could change it to something like James. So what this says here is whenever someone inputs something onChange, set that username to James. Yeah. And so when we go in here, let's refresh our browser and make sure that this works. So let's see here. We go right here and looking at Bobette, keep your eye on the prize here. As I start to type, boom, you'll see it immediately pops over and changes to James. Okay, cool. Except that we don't actually want to call everyone's not named James. We don't want to change it to James every time. We want to change it to whatever the user enters. And without getting like too deep into it and distracted, but every time this input, something happens and there's an event that it can call on, which is like an object. That event has different properties. One of them being the target, and that's like kind of looking at this input, the exact thing that's like happening and where it's happening. And then what we want from that input is the value of the target of the event. So that's what that kind of means. You don't have to, you can study that, get into that tangent of like different things associated with the event. We needn't get into it too much here, but this is the secret code, as it were, to grab the value that someone is entering in your input. So onChange, we're like, hey, set the username to whatever the heck someone's entering. And this is how it works. Let's see if it's functional right now. So we refresh it. Yeah, Code Sandbox is so cool. It just blows my mind. So here we are, keeping your eye on the prize, looking at Bobette. Hopefully that changes as I start typing, yeah? And I can enter in, yeah, and as you can see, it like changes exactly as you're typing to whatever you're typing to. That's perfect. This is what we want. So it's connected to username, and that's kind of like how the enter questions and then spit them out on the page dealio works. Let's go through a couple more kind of quickly just to make sure that we got it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to I just created a new one, so we'll do create a new paragraph and say enter an animal name or an animal, yeah, type of animal. Sweet. And then we'll provide that same kind of input, boom, which is a type text. We could give it a placeholder, great, and it can say enter an animal type. And then onChange, anticipating our move of a hook, we're going to want to call the arrow function. That is going to be, and let's make it right now. So what is it going to be called? boom. I'm just going to copy and paste that guy. Instead of username, we'll call this one, let's just call it animal. Animal. Set animal. And the default will be Bobcat. And we'll put it out right here even. Let's see here. It used to be called that when he was a child. It did that weird formatting thing again. He had a pet. And then we'll put the animal there, wrapping in those curly brackets so that it is in fact, boom, grabbing our variable, which we did all this so that we can set the animal on change to, remember what it is? That weirdo thing right here, the event target value, the event's target value. Yeah. Yeah. Great. And when we save this all, let's see, hit a Bobcat, boom. And as I start to enter here, let's say tiger, you can see, oh, it changes immediately with it. Boom. And this is kind of how it works. Rinse, wash, repeat, as it were. We just do that a few times. And so I needed to bore you with doing that all these times. I'll leave you to it with like having fun and doing your own for the next 5 are asked for on the final here. And so let's do the secondary thing, which is creating a button so that it toggles back and forth, because we don't want our users to be able to see our story while they're entering their answers. That kind of ruins the game. You want us to be able to see the answers, and then you hit submit, and then it'll hide the answers, and then you can see the story with all the users' information there, like we see here and we were setting up. Cool. This is called conditional rendering, and we're going to do it in kind of a neat way using hooks. And so this is how it works. You can think of this as two portions here, right? Looking at our code, we have one right here and one right here. And when we show one, we want to hide the other, and we only want, and vice versa. So we're going to create a hook that is a Boolean, that is that it's true or false. And we're going to say, hey, is it true or false that I should display the answer? So let's call it display answer, and we'll need to be able to set display answer in SWER. Make sure you're spelling correctly, as our variable and the function in order to change it, our hook to change it. We'll say use state, and this is going to be a Boolean, so we can set it to true, false. Let's set to or null, or let's do it to true, TRUE. And so when it's true, you should be able to display, you should be able to see not the answers. Oh my gosh, I'm like silly. Let me change these answer to question. I'm so sorry if I've been saying answer this whole time. I was so focused on my code. I was like, so yeah, should we display the questions for the audience or not? And when we do want to display the questions, this stuff should show up, and when it's false, then it should show the other stuff. So this is how we're going to do it. We're going to wrap this in those curly braces again. Booyah. And we're going to set it as this conditional, and we're going to say if display question is true, and we just write display question, and all of this stuff is true, and HTML always delivers true, then display. Ultimately, what that means is, if this is true, show this stuff. If it's false, don't show this stuff. And we're getting an error right now, as you may notice, because as React is kind of picky, as we talked about before, in let, it has to get delivered just one thing. You can give it a whole bunch of things like this. Like we got an input, paragraph, another input, another paragraph, a lot of stuff going on. We can do that, all that stuff, that's like 4 things, if we deliver it in a single thing being a div. So we're just throwing it all in like a folder. Like you're taking all these individual like pieces of paper and we're going to throw it all in one divider that opens here and it closes here. And let's get some nicer formatting so you can see it. So it's like an envelope that holds all this stuff inside of this div. Yeah. And now we deliver that as one package saying if display question is true, then show that stuff. Okay, and we can see it right now. You can see the inverse this way. Check it out. If I change this now to false, then all of a sudden the questions disappear. Yeah? So, of course we don't want the user to have to go into our code and type things in order to like see the questions or not. So we'll change that with a button in a moment. But let's just set up our conditional because we got half of it done. But what's the problem? The problem is that we can still see this, we can still see our paragraph, the answer, like our story. And we only want to show one or the other. So we're going to wrap this guy in a second set of brackets. And we're going to do something kind of clever. We're going to do almost the same thing. We're going to say, hey, like before, display question, if that's true, then show this stuff. We don't have to wrap this one in a div, you'll notice, because it is just one thing. It's just a single paragraph. And let me see what it's yelling at me about. Unexpected token. Oh yeah, I'm missing that. There you go. Okay, just missing a little. I didn't have an end of my little parenthesis. All right, sweet. So here we go. Great, fantastic. We're going to do something kind of clever. We set this up, and so right now, of course, if display question is true, then it'll show this stuff, and it'll show this stuff. And if I change it to false, all this stuff disappears because that's not true, so it doesn't show the questions. And this isn't true, so it doesn't show my answer, as it were. It doesn't show our reply, our little story. And so we want those to be flipped. We want it to be not if display question is true, but rather if display question is not true. And the syntax, the fancy syntax for that is an exclamation point. And this says if it's not true of display question, then it'll show this stuff. And so when it's false, this says if it's not false, double negative means true, then it'll have this. When it's true, then it'll just show our questions and it won't show our answer, as it were. Kind of clever, right? So we go back and forth, and so now these are flipped. So now we got that part done, but of course we want to connect this to a button, right? So let's do that right quick. And we're going to use this guy, the set display question, and we're going to toggle it using that. So let's give this a button, like we've done before. Booyah! And we'll say, we'll just say submit. We'll call the submit button. And notice we got a little button here. Boom. HTML comes with a little styling, on click stuff, and hover and stuff. And let's see. We're going to give this guy an on click event. And we're going to say, hey, on click, okay, do the function, the arrow function, creates an arrow function, or it has an infinite loop. And we're going to want to set the display question. Boo! So on click, do this function. Set the display question. And what do we want to display and change it to? Well, if it's, let's see here. If it starts off as true, which should be the user experience, and you're seeing these, then we could just say, set display question to false, right? We save it, and we click submit, and great. But oh, wait a second, our submit button now, it doesn't get us back, and it would be kind of nice to have that button not just kind of get us to the answer, but kind of bounce back and forth. And we can do that in a really clever way, thinking about this idea, which is the opposite, right? This says if display question is true, then this means false, right? It's like the opposite button. So we don't want to actually change it from true to false all the time, or from false to true to every time. What we want to change it to is whatever it is, do the opposite. And that's exactly what that means. The opposite of what it currently is. When we save all this, let's see if this works. We click the button, yeah. And now our submitting button toggles back and forth from one to the other. Conditional rendering, yeah. Button and stuff. Fantastic, y'all. Well, I hope that that was illuminating, elucidating. I hope that in some way it helped clear some things up. And please feel free to ask me any questions or something to clarify. All right, fantastic. You made a Madlib. Great job. Hooks in order to do input handlers for text input. And then second part, conditional rendering. Nice job, everyone. Happy coding.